The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as Faith Thornton pressed her palms against the cold stone walls of the church basement, her fingers raw from hours of searching for a weakness in her prison. 3 days had passed since Reverend Wilcox had accused her of witchcraft and locked her away from the rest of the town, all because she had dared to speak against his tyrannical rule over Redemption Creek. Faith slumped down onto the dirt floor, her once pristine blue dress now smudged with dust and grime. At 22, she had always been known for her spirited nature and unwavering resolve, but even her determination was beginning to waver in the darkness of her confinement. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her of the meager rations that were slid under the door twice daily, just enough to keep her alive, but not enough to maintain her strength. The small basement window near the ceiling let in a sliver of fading light, illuminating the collection of old church relics and forgotten furniture that surrounded her. Faith had tried standing on an old chair to reach the window, but it was too small for her to squeeze through, and the iron bars made it impossible anyway. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, though her faith in divine intervention had diminished with each passing hour. What Faith didn't know was that her prayers were about to be answered, though not in the way she had expected. Miles away, Quentin Campbell adjusted his weathered hat as he guided his horse down the trail toward Redemption Creek. At 25, Quentin had already lived many lives: cowhand, bounty hunter, and now drifter, moving from town to town in search of work, and perhaps a place he might someday call home. His rugged appearance, with his sun-tanned skin and calloused hands, told the story of a man who had spent most of his life under the open sky. As Quentin approached the outskirts of town, he noticed something unusual. The normally bustling main street was eerily quiet, with only a few townsfolk scurrying about like mice afraid of being spotted by a cat. Even the saloon, typically alive with music and laughter at this hour, seemed subdued. Quentin dismounted in front of the livery stable, where an elderly man with a weathered face was sweeping the entrance. "Afternoon," Quentin greeted, tipping his hat. "Mind if I board my horse here for a spell? Name's Quentin Campbell." The old man looked up, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "New in town, are ya? Not the best time to be visiting Redemption Creek, Mr. Campbell." "Is that so? And why's that?" The old man glanced nervously over his shoulder before leaning closer. "Town's been under a dark cloud since Reverend Wilcox took over the church. Man's got folks terrified with his talk of sin and damnation. Just 3 days ago, he locked up the schoolteacher, Miss Thornton, in the church basement, claims she's a witch." He spat on the ground. "Load of hogwash, if you ask me. She's just a girl who dared to question his authority." Quentin's interest was piqued. He'd encountered men like Wilcox before, those who used religion to control and manipulate. "Where's the sheriff in all this, Sheriff Miller?" The old man laughed bitterly. "He's in the Reverend's pocket like most of the town council. The few who speak up either end up leaving town or worse. Miss Thornton was the only one brave enough to stand her ground." After settling his horse, Quentin made his way to the saloon, hoping to gather more information. Inside, the usual card games and drinking continued, but the atmosphere was tense, conversations hushed. He ordered a whiskey and took a seat at the corner table, observing the room. It wasn't long before a young woman approached his table. Her painted face and low-cut dress marked her as one of the saloon girls. "Haven't seen you around before," she said, a practiced smile on her lips. "Buy a lady a drink," Quentin nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Name's Quentin. Heard some troubling news about your town." The woman's smile faltered. "If you're talking about Miss Thornton, I'd be careful who you discuss that with. You know her." "Everyone knows Faith," she replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Sweetest person you'd ever meet. Taught half the children in this town to read, including my little brother. What the Reverend is doing to her isn't right, but no one's brave enough to help her." "Why did he lock her up?" The woman sipped her drink before answering. "Faith stood up during sermon last Sunday, called him out for taking money from the poorest families in town while he lives like a king. Said it wasn't Christian to preach charity while practicing greed." She shook her head. "Next thing we know, he's accusing her of witchcraft, saying she's been corrupting the children with her dangerous ideas. Sheriff Miller arrested her that same day." Quentin contemplated this information as he finished his whiskey. By the time he left the saloon, night had fallen completely, casting the town in darkness broken only by the occasional lamplight from windows. On impulse, he decided to walk past the church, a large white building with a tall steeple that loomed over the main street. As he approached, he noticed a light in one of the windows of the adjoining building, which he assumed was the Reverend's quarters. Through the window, he could see a man in clerical clothes pacing back and forth, seemingly agitated. Outside the main church doors, a young man in a deputy's uniform stood guard, looking bored and tired. Quentin retreated to the shadows and circled around to the back of the church. There, set into the foundation, were two small windows at ground level, barred with iron but allowing him a glimpse into the basement below. As he crouched down to look inside, he heard a faint sound, a woman's voice, singing softly in the darkness. Inside the basement, Faith sang to keep her spirits up, a hymn her mother had taught her as a child. The sound echoed against the stone walls, providing her only company in her solitude. She stopped abruptly when she noticed a shadow blocking the moonlight streaming through the window. Fear gripped her heart, thinking it might be the Reverend coming to pronounce her judgment. Instead, a deep voice whispered, "Miss Thornton, are you all right in there?" Faith scrambled to her feet, moving cautiously toward the window. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Name's Quentin Campbell. I heard about your situation. Is there a way into the basement from the outside?" Hope surged in Faith's chest, though she tempered it with caution. "There's a cellar door on the east side of the church, but it's always locked. The only other entrance is through the church itself, and they keep a guard at the door." "How many guards?" "Just one deputy at night. The Reverend keeps the key on him at all times." Quentin nodded, though Faith couldn't see him clearly through the darkness. "I'll come back for you, Miss Thornton. Hold on a little longer." Before she could respond, the shadow disappeared, leaving Faith wondering if she had imagined the entire exchange. Still, for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Quentin spent the next day gathering information about the church and Reverend Wilcox. He learned that the Reverend held evening prayer meetings on Wednesdays, which would be taking place that night. It would be his best opportunity to access the church while most of the town was distracted. As dusk settled over Redemption Creek, Quentin positioned himself in an alley across from the church, watching as townsfolk filed in for the evening service. Among them was Sheriff Miller, a stout man with a bushy mustache, and his deputy, who had been standing guard the previous night. Most importantly, Reverend Wilcox stood at the entrance, greeting his congregation with a benevolent smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Once the service began, Quentin made his move. He slipped around to the back of the church where the Reverend's quarters were attached. The lock on the rear door was simple enough, and with a few skilled movements of his pocket knife, Quentin gained entry. The Reverend's quarters were opulent compared to what Quentin had seen of the rest of the town: fine furniture, imported rugs, and shelves lined with leather-bound books. It confirmed what he'd heard about the man's hypocrisy. Quentin searched quickly but methodically, checking drawers and cabinets for the key to the basement. He finally found it in a small wooden box on the Reverend's desk, alongside a substantial amount of cash, likely the church donations that should have gone to helping the community. Pocketing the key, Quentin slipped back out the way he had come. The singing from inside the church covered any noise he might have made as he made his way to the main building and found the door that led to the basement steps. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and Quentin descended the wooden stairs, a lantern he had borrowed from the Reverend's quarters lighting his way. Faith was huddled in a corner when the door at the top of the stairs creaked open. She scrambled to her feet, ready to face whatever new accusation or punishment the Reverend had in store. Instead, a tall figure with broad shoulders and a cowboy hat descended the stairs, the warm glow of a lantern illuminating his rugged features. "Miss Thornton," he called softly. Faith stepped forward, her legs weak from days of inadequate food and little movement. "You came back," she said, recognizing the deep voice from the previous night. Quentin held up a brass key, his face breaking into a relieved smile when he saw her. "You're coming out," he said, moving quickly to her side. "Can you walk?" Faith nodded, though she swayed slightly on her feet. "I think so. We don't have much time. The service will be ending soon." He offered his arm for support, and Faith took it gratefully, feeling the strength in his muscles as he helped her up the stairs. The cool night air that greeted them as they emerged from the church felt like heaven against her skin after days in the musty basement. "My horse is waiting behind the livery," Quentin explained as they hurried through the shadows, avoiding the main street. "We need to get you out of town before they discover you're gone." Faith hesitated, pulling back slightly. "I can't just leave. This is my home. My students need me." Quentin's expression was grim in the moonlight. "Miss Thornton, they were going to hang you for witchcraft. Once we're safe, we can figure out how to clear your name, but right now, we need to get you somewhere safe." The reality of her situation hit Faith like a physical blow. She had known the Reverend wanted to make an example of her, but hearing it stated so plainly made her blood run cold. With a reluctant nod, she allowed Quentin to lead her toward the livery. They had just reached the back of the building when shouts erupted from the direction of the church. The alarm had been raised sooner than expected. "They've discovered you're gone," Quentin said, quickening their pace. "We need to hurry." His horse, a sturdy Palomino, was tethered behind the livery as promised. Quentin helped Faith mount before swinging up behind her. The closeness of his body against hers would have scandalized her under normal circumstances, but now it provided a sense of security she desperately needed. As they galloped out of town, Faith looked back at the place that had been her home for the past 3 years. Lanterns were being lit throughout Redemption Creek as the search for her began. She wondered if she would ever be able to return. "Where are we going?" she asked, raising her voice over the pounding of hooves. "I have a friend who owns a ranch about 20 miles north of here," Quentin replied. "He owes me a favor. We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move." Faith nodded, too exhausted to question him further. As they rode through the night, the adrenaline that had sustained her began to fade, and she found herself leaning more heavily against Quentin's chest. Despite the precariousness of their situation, she felt safer than she had in days. Quentin felt Faith's body grow heavier against him as exhaustion overtook her. He adjusted his grip, keeping her secure as they rode through the darkness. The pale moonlight illuminated the trail ahead, and in the distance, he could see the silhouette of the mountains against the night sky. The woman in his arms was a mystery to him, a schoolteacher accused of witchcraft in a town controlled by a corrupt reverend. Yet something about her courage had compelled him to intervene, to risk his own safety for hers. As they rode further from Redemption Creek, Quentin wondered what he had gotten himself into, but he didn't regret his decision. Dawn was breaking on the horizon when they finally reached the Richardson Ranch. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. "Who goes there?" he called out, raising his weapon. "It's Quentin Campbell," Quentin replied, slowing his horse. "I need to speak with Harold." The man lowered his rifle slightly but remained cautious. "Mr. Richardson ain't expecting visitors. Tell him it's about the situation in Santa Fe last year. He'll understand." The ranch hand hesitated before nodding and heading toward the main house. A few minutes later, a tall man with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard emerged, squinting at them in the early morning light. "Campbell, is that you?" he called, approaching the horse. His eyes widened when he noticed Faith. "Who's your companion?" "This is Miss Faith Thornton," Quentin explained, dismounting and helping Faith down. She swayed on her feet, weak from hunger and exhaustion. "She needs help, Harold, we both do." Harold Richardson looked between them, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Any friend of Quentin's is welcome here. Come inside and we'll get you both settled." Inside the ranch house, Faith was shown to a guest room by Mrs. Richardson, a kind woman who immediately set about preparing a bath and finding clean clothes for her. Meanwhile, Quentin explained the situation to Harold in the study. A witch hunt. In this day and age? Harold shook his head in disbelief. "And you say this Reverend has the whole town under his thumb?" Quentin nodded, accepting the glass of whiskey Harold offered. "Near enough. Those who don't support him are too afraid to speak up." "And the girl, what's her story?" Schoolteacher stood up to him publicly, so he made an example of her. Quentin took a long sip of his drink. "I couldn't just leave her there to hang, Harold." Harold studied his friend thoughtfully. "No, I suppose you couldn't. That conscience of yours always did get you into trouble." He sighed. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, but you should know if this reverend is as powerful as you say, he won't stop looking for her. Or for you. Quentin knew Harold was right. Wilcox wouldn't let this humiliation stand. We just need a few days to rest and make a plan. Maybe gather some evidence against him. Evidence of what? Corruption, for starters. He's been pocketing church donations, living like a king while the town struggles. Quentin leaned forward. If we could prove it, expose him to the congregation. Harold nodded slowly. It might work, but it's risky. You'd be putting yourself and Miss Thornton in danger. We're already in danger, Quentin replied grimly. At least this way we'd have a fighting chance. Later that evening, after Faith had rested and eaten her first proper meal in days, she joined Quentin on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the darkness of the basement where she had been confined. Mr. Richardson says you saved his life in Santa Fe, she said, settling into the chair beside Quentin. He smiled slightly. He exaggerates. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, like with me. Faith studied him curiously. Why did you help me, Mr. Campbell? You don't even know me, Quentin considered the question. I've seen men like Wilcox before, men who use fear to control others. What he was doing to you wasn't right. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Faith's expression softened. Well, I'm grateful. Whatever your reasons, I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything, Miss Thornton. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. Mr. Campbell, Faith began hesitantly. I heard you and Mr. Richardson discussing a plan to expose the Reverend. I want to help. Quentin turned to look at her, taking in her determined expression. Despite her ordeal, there was a fire in her eyes that impressed him. It's dangerous. It's my fight too, she insisted, more than anyone's. Those people in town, my students, their families, they deserve to know the truth about the man leading their church. Before Quentin could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Harold emerged from the house, rifle in hand, as 4 riders came into view. Were you expecting visitors? Quentin asked, standing and instinctively positioning himself in front of Faith. Harold shook his head. No, and they're coming in too fast for my liking. As the riders drew closer, Quentin recognized the lead man, Deputy Johnson from Redemption Creek. Somehow they had been tracked to the Richardson ranch. Get inside, Quentin urged Faith. If things go wrong, there's a back door through the kitchen. Don't hesitate to run. Faith nodded, though her expression showed she had no intention of leaving him behind. She retreated into the house as Quentin and Harold faced the approaching riders. Deputy Johnson, Quentin greeted calmly as the men reined in their horses. You're a long way from Redemption Creek. The deputy's hand rested on his holstered gun. Campbell. We've come for the witch and the man who helped her escape. That would be you. Harold stepped forward, his rifle not quite pointed at the men but ready. This is private property, deputy. You have no jurisdiction here. We're not looking for trouble, Richardson, Johnson replied. Just hand over the woman and Campbell and we'll be on our way. Quentin's hand hovered near his own weapon. And if we refuse, the deputy's expression hardened, then we'll take them by force. Reverend Wilcox wants justice served. Justice? Quentin scoffed. Is that what you call locking an innocent woman in a basement and planning to hang her? Some justice. She's a witch, one of the other riders spat. She turned against the church. She questioned a corrupt man who's stealing from his own congregation, Quentin countered. That doesn't make her a witch. It makes her braver than the lot of you. The tension in the air was palpable as both sides sized each other up. 4 against 2 weren't favorable odds, but Quentin knew Harold was as good with that rifle as any man he'd met. Before the situation could escalate further, Faith's voice rang out from the doorway. That's enough. I won't have blood shed on my account. Quentin turned in dismay to see her step onto the porch. Faith, get back inside, she ignored him, addressing the deputy directly. Mr. Johnson, you've known me for 3 years. You've seen me teach your nephew to read. Do you honestly believe I'm a witch? The deputy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. The Reverend says what serves his interests, Faith interrupted. Tell me, how is the new church roof coming along? The one you've all been donating to for the past year. Have you seen any construction begin? A flicker of doubt crossed the deputy's face. Well, no, and have you noticed the Reverend's new carriage? Or the fine clothes his wife wears while half the town struggles to make ends meet? Faith took another step forward. He called me a witch because I asked these questions publicly, because I threatened his control. Her words seemed to hit their mark as the deputy and his men exchanged uncertain glances. Quentin watched with admiration as Faith continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm not asking you to believe me over him," she said. "I'm asking you to look at the evidence yourself. Go back to town, check the church accounts, see where the money is really going." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, to Quentin's surprise, Deputy Johnson slowly nodded. Maybe we should look into it," he admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't change the fact that I have orders to bring you back." Quentin stepped forward. "How about a compromise? Give us 3 days. If we can provide proof of the Reverend's corruption, you bring him to justice instead. If we can't, Miss Thornton will return with you voluntarily." The deputy considered this, clearly torn. Finally, he said, 2 days, and I'm leaving one of my men here to make sure you don't run." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than a shootout. Quentin nodded his agreement, and after some discussion, it was arranged that one of the deputies would stay behind while the others returned to town. As the dust from the departing riders settled, Faith turned to Quentin, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. 2 days isn't much time. "No," he agreed, "but it's all we've got. We'd better make the most of it." That night, Quentin, Faith, and Harold sat around the dining room table planning their next move. The deputy who had stayed behind, a young man named Williams, was given a room in the bunkhouse where Harold's ranch hands could keep an eye on him. The Reverend must keep records somewhere, Faith reasoned. Ledgers showing the church donations and expenditures. Probably in his office, Quentin mused. But getting back into town unnoticed won't be easy, especially with Williams reporting our movements back to the sheriff. Harold stroked his beard thoughtfully. What about his wife, Martha Wilcox? Would she know anything about her husband's dealings? Faith's eyes lit up. Mrs. Wilcox, she might. She's always struck me as uncomfortable with her husband's methods, though she never speaks against him publicly. She turned to Quentin. If we could talk to her alone, away from the Reverend's influence. She visits her sister in the neighboring town of Copper Springs every Thursday, Harold interjected. Both Quentin and Faith looked at him in surprise. What? My wife corresponds with half the county. She mentions that Martha's sister has been ailing for months, and Martha makes the journey regularly to care for her. Quentin nodded slowly. Tomorrow's Thursday, if we could intercept her on the road. It's risky, Faith admitted, but it might be our best chance. The plan was set. At dawn, Quentin and Faith would ride toward Copper Springs, hoping to intercept Mrs. Wilcox on her weekly journey. Harold would stay behind to keep an eye on Deputy Williams and prepare for whatever might come next. As they finished their planning, Faith stifled a yawn. The events of the day had taken their toll, and despite her nap earlier, she was exhausted. You should get some rest, Quentin suggested gently. Tomorrow will be a long day, Faith nodded, rising from her chair. Mr. Campbell, she said, hesitating at the door. Thank you again. For everything, Quentin smiled. Get some sleep, Miss Thornton, and please call me Quentin. Then you must call me Faith, she replied, a soft smile playing on her lips before she turned and headed up to her room. After she left, Harold gave Quentin a knowing look. She's quite something, your school teacher. She's not my school teacher, Quentin protested, though he couldn't help the warmth that spread through him at the thought. Harold chuckled. Not yet, perhaps, but I haven't seen you look at a woman that way in a long time. Quentin didn't respond, but as he retired to his own room, he found his thoughts lingering on Faith, her courage, her intelligence, and the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. It had been only 2 days since he'd met her, yet somehow she had already worked her way under his skin in a way no woman had before. The next morning, Quentin and Faith set out at first light, telling Deputy Williams they were going hunting for fresh meat. The young deputy seemed suspicious, but didn't try to stop them, perhaps because Harold made it clear he would be joining them later. They rode east toward Copper Springs, following a winding trail through a grove of cottonwood trees. The morning air was crisp, and Faith seemed to relish the freedom after her confinement, taking deep breaths and admiring the landscape around them. I never thought I'd appreciate something as simple as a sunrise again, she commented as they rode side by side. Quentin watched her, struck by her resilience. "You're handling all this remarkably well," Faith smiled ruefully. "What choice do I have, fall apart or move forward, and I've never been one for falling apart." "What brought you to Redemption Creek in the first place?" Quentin asked. "You don't seem like someone who would choose such a small town." "My father died," she explained, her expression growing somber. "He was a doctor in Denver. After he passed, I needed a fresh start." The teaching position in Redemption Creek seemed perfect, a small town where I could make a difference. She glanced at him curiously. "What about you? What's your story, Quentin Campbell?" Quentin hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing his past. But there was something about Faith that made him want to open up. "I grew up on a farm in Texas, lost my parents to influenza when I was 16. After that, I drifted, took whatever work I could find, spent some time with a cattle outfit, then tried my hand at bounty hunting. And now." He shrugged. "Still drifting, I suppose, never found a place that felt like home again." Faith seemed to consider this. "Perhaps you're looking too hard. Sometimes home isn't a place, it's people." Before Quentin could respond, the sound of an approaching carriage caught their attention. They reined in their horses and moved to the side of the trail. Around the bend came a modest buggy driven by a middle-aged woman in a dark blue dress. "Martha Wilcox," Faith urged her horse forward, raising a hand in greeting. "Mrs. Wilcox, good morning." Martha pulled back on the reins, her eyes widening in shock when she recognized Faith. "Miss Thornton, good heavens, child, what are you doing here? The whole town is looking for you." "I know, and I'm sorry to startle you," Faith said, guiding her horse alongside the buggy. "But I need your help, Mrs. Wilcox. May we speak with you for a moment?" Martha's gaze darted nervously to Quentin, then back to Faith. "I shouldn't be seen with you if my husband found out." "Please," Faith implored. "Just a few minutes of your time, it's important." Something in Faith's earnest expression seemed to sway the older woman. She sighed and gestured to a small clearing off the trail. "Very well, but only for a moment." Once they were off the main trail, Faith introduced Quentin briefly before getting straight to the point. "Mrs. Wilcox, I believe your husband has been misusing church funds for his personal benefit. We need evidence to prove it." Martha's face paled, but she didn't seem surprised by the accusation. "Why are you telling me this? What do you expect me to do?" "We know you visit your sister every Thursday," Quentin explained gently, "which means you have access to your home when the Reverend is at the church for his weekly council meeting. You want me to spy on my husband?" Martha's voice trembled slightly. Faith reached out, placing a hand on the woman's arm. "We want you to help us uncover the truth. Surely you've noticed things that don't add up. The donations for the church roof that never materialized. The new possessions while families in town struggle." Martha was silent for a long moment, her internal conflict visible on her face. Finally, she looked up, resolution in her eyes. "I have noticed. For years I've noticed, but I told myself it wasn't my place to question." She took a deep breath. "What do you need me to do?" Relief washed over Faith's face. "His ledgers. He must keep records of the church finances somewhere in your home. If we could see them, compare them to the actual expenditures." "He keeps everything locked in his study," Martha confirmed. "I'm not supposed to enter without his permission, but—" She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small key. "I had this made years ago, just in case." Quentin raised an eyebrow, impressed by the woman's foresight. "Mrs. Wilcox, would you be willing to use that key and bring us those ledgers?" Martha hesitated, fear flashing across her face. "If he found out—" "He won't," Faith assured her. "You'll be visiting your sister as usual. On your return tomorrow, stop here." She gestured to the clearing where they sat. "We'll meet you at noon. You can return the ledgers after we've examined them, and no one will ever know they were gone." The plan was risky, relying heavily on Martha Wilcox's courage and discretion. But as they watched her buggy continue down the trail toward Copper Springs, both Quentin and Faith felt a cautious hope. "Do you think she'll do it?" Quentin asked as they rode back toward the Richardson ranch. Faith nodded. "I think she will. She's lived under his shadow for too long, seeing his hypocrisy firsthand. This might be her only chance to do something about it." They spent the remainder of the day planning their next steps, assuming Martha would come through with the ledgers. Harold provided them with information about the county judge, a man named Everett Davis who was known for his fairness and integrity. "If you can get solid evidence to Judge Davis," Harold explained, "he could issue a warrant for Wilcox's arrest." The sheriff might be in the Reverend's pocket, but he can't ignore a judge's orders without facing serious consequences himself. That evening, Faith found Quentin sitting alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She settled into the chair beside him, drawing a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Penny for your thoughts," she said softly. Quentin glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "Just thinking about how much has changed in just a few days. A week ago, I was riding alone, no particular destination in mind. Now here I am, involved in a conspiracy against a corrupt reverend with a schoolteacher accused of witchcraft." Faith laughed, the sound light and musical in the quiet evening. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather fantastical." Her expression grew more serious. "Do you regret it, getting involved?" Quentin shook his head without hesitation. "No, not for a moment." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that had been building since the moment he'd found her in that church basement. For a brief instant, Quentin wondered what it would be like to kiss her, to feel her lips against his own. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Faith seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. She looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I should get some rest," she said, rising from her chair. "Tomorrow's an important day." "Faith," Quentin called softly as she turned to go. When she looked back, he simply said, "We'll get through this, together." Her smile in response was warm and genuine. "I know we will. Good night, Quentin." As he watched her disappear into the house, Quentin realized with sudden clarity that whatever happened tomorrow, his life had irrevocably changed. Faith Thornton had entered his world like a whirlwind, and he had no desire to go back to the solitary existence he'd known before. The next day dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the nervous energy that pervaded the Richardson ranch. Deputy Williams had grown increasingly suspicious of Quentin and Faith's activities, insisting on accompanying them when they announced they were heading out again. "Just going for a ride," Quentin explained casually. "Miss Thornton has been cooped up for days. She needs fresh air." Williams frowned. "I'll come with you." Harold intervened, his expression serious. "Actually, Deputy, I need your help today. One of my men spotted rustlers near the north pasture last night. We're organizing a search party, and I could use another gun." It was a blatant lie, but Harold delivered it with such conviction that Williams hesitated. "I'm supposed to be watching these two." "They won't leave the property," Harold assured him. "Besides, rustlers are a more immediate concern than a schoolteacher and a cowboy, wouldn't you say?" After some argument, Williams reluctantly agreed, though he made it clear he expected them all to be present when he returned. Once he had ridden out with Harold's ranch hands, Quentin and Faith saddled their horses and headed toward the meeting place. "That was close," Faith commented as they rode side by side. "Harold is quite the convincing storyteller," Quentin chuckled. "He didn't survive 30 years on the frontier without learning a few tricks. Let's just hope Mrs. Wilcox is as reliable as we're counting on her to be." They reached the clearing well before noon and settled down to wait, tethering their horses in a spot hidden from the main trail. Faith paced nervously, checking the position of the sun every few minutes. "What if she doesn't come?" she asked, voicing the fear they both shared. Quentin reached out, gently catching her hand to stop her pacing. "Then we'll find another way. We won't give up, Faith." The touch of his hand on hers sent a warmth spreading through Faith's body. She looked up at him, struck again by the quiet strength in his gaze. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hooves made them both turn. A moment later, Martha Wilcox appeared on horseback, rather than in her usual buggy. She dismounted quickly, glancing nervously over her shoulder as she approached them. "I couldn't bring the buggy without raising questions," she explained, reaching into a saddlebag, "but I have what you asked for." She handed Faith a leather-bound ledger and a stack of papers tied with string. The ledger shows all church donations for the past 3 years. The papers are receipts for his personal purchases, the new carriage, furniture from St. Louis, even jewelry for me. Her voice broke slightly. "All paid for with church money." Faith leafed through the ledger, her expression growing grim. "The roof fund alone has over $3,000. He's been collecting for it for almost 2 years. Quentin examined some of the receipts. "And according to these, he's spent nearly twice that on himself in the same period." He looked up at Martha with respect. "This is exactly what we needed, Mrs. Wilcox. Thank you." Martha nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. I should go. My sister thinks I'm just out for a morning ride. I'll return tomorrow as planned, and no one will know I was here. After she had gone, Quentin and Faith carefully examined the documents, marking pages that showed the most blatant misuse of funds. We need to get these to Judge Davis as soon as possible, Faith said. Before Deputy Williams realizes we've gone. They rode hard toward the town of Silver Creek, 20 miles to the west, where Judge Davis was known to hold court. The journey took several hours, and the sun was beginning its descent when they finally arrived. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of town. Inside, they were told the judge was concluding a case but would see them shortly. As they waited on a wooden bench in the hallway, Faith clutched the ledger tightly, her knuckles white with tension. What if it's not enough? She whispered. What if he doesn't believe us? Quentin covered her hand with his own. The evidence speaks for itself, Faith, and you're very persuasive when you believe in something. Before she could respond, the courtroom doors opened and a bailiff emerged. Judge Davis will see you now, he announced. Judge Everett Davis was an imposing figure, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through a person. He listened silently as Faith explained the situation, occasionally nodding or frowning as she detailed Reverend Wilcox's corruption and her subsequent imprisonment. When she finished, he examined the ledger and receipts carefully, his expression growing increasingly grave. Finally, he looked up at them both. This is a serious matter, he said, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, false imprisonment, even attempted murder if what you say about the planned hanging is true. It is true, Your Honor, Faith insisted. Deputy Johnson and his men were sent to bring me back for exactly that purpose. The judge nodded slowly. I believe you, Miss Thornton. These financial records alone are damning evidence. He reached for a piece of paper and began writing. I'm issuing a warrant for Reverend Wilcox's arrest to be executed immediately. I'll also send a telegram to the territorial governor informing him of the situation in Redemption Creek. Relief washed over Faith's face. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet, the judge cautioned. Arresting a man like Wilcox won't be simple. He has supporters, people who believe in him despite his actions. There could be resistance. We understand, Quentin said, but justice has to be served regardless of the difficulty. Judge Davis handed the warrant to his bailiff with instructions to assemble a posse. I'm sending 10 men, including 2 federal marshals who happen to be in town. They'll accompany you back to Redemption Creek immediately. As they left the courthouse, Faith's expression was a mixture of relief and apprehension. It's really happening, she said quietly. After all this time, he's finally going to face consequences for his actions. Quentin helped her mount her horse, his hand lingering on hers. You did it, Faith. Your courage made this possible, she shook her head. We did it. I wouldn't have gotten this far without you, Quentin. As they rode back toward Redemption Creek, accompanied by the judge's men, Quentin found himself wondering what would happen once this was all over. Would Faith return to her teaching position? Would she want to stay in a town that had turned on her so quickly? And where would that leave him? The sun had set by the time they reached the Richardson Ranch, where they found Harold pacing anxiously on the porch. Deputy Williams was nowhere to be seen. Thank goodness you're back, Harold exclaimed as they dismounted. Williams returned hours ago, realized you were gone, and rode back to town in a fury. I expect the sheriff and his men will be here by morning. They'll find more than they bargained for, Quentin replied, gesturing to the posse behind them. Judge Davis has issued a warrant for Reverend Wilcox's arrest. We're heading to Redemption Creek tonight. Harold's eyes widened. Tonight, that's risky. The town will be on alert after Williams' return. We can't wait, Faith explained, her voice firm. Every hour gives Wilcox more time to cover his tracks or flee. We have to move now. After a brief rest and a hasty meal, they set out again, the marshals leading the way. The night was clear, the moon providing enough light to follow the trail. As they approached Redemption Creek, they could see lanterns moving about the town clearly. Deputy Williams' warning had put everyone on alert. The posse stopped at the edge of town, and one of the marshals turned to address them. We'll head straight for the church. If the Reverend is there, we'll take him into custody immediately. If not, we'll secure the building and search his quarters. The rest of you, spread out and keep an eye out for the sheriff and his men. No unnecessary violence, but stand your ground if confronted." As they rode into town, several townspeople emerged from buildings to watch their approach, murmuring in surprise at the sight of Faith Thornton returning with armed men. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the church, a small crowd had gathered. The church itself was lit up, suggesting the Reverend was indeed inside. The marshals dismounted and approached the main doors, warrant in hand. Quentin stayed close to Faith, his hand near his gun, watchful for any threat. Before the marshals could reach the church doors, they swung open, and Reverend Wilcox himself appeared, flanked by Sheriff Miller and 2 deputies, including Williams. "What is the meaning of this?" Wilcox demanded, his voice booming across the street. "How dare you bring that witch back to our town?" One of the marshals stepped forward, unfolding the warrant. "Reverend Jacob Wilcox, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and false imprisonment. You're to come with us immediately to appear before Judge Davis in Silver Creek." The Reverend's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong. We have evidence that suggests otherwise," the marshal replied calmly. "Financial records showing systematic misuse of church donations for personal gain. Witnesses who can attest to your false accusations against Miss Thornton." As the marshal spoke, Faith noticed movement in the crowd. Martha Wilcox had appeared, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering. Their eyes met briefly, and Martha gave a small, resolute nod. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand on his gun. "I can't let you take him, Marshal. The Reverend is a respected member of this community." "Don't be a fool, Miller," the marshal warned. "Interfering with federal officers is a serious offense. You'll end up in a cell right alongside him." The tension in the air was palpable as both sides faced off. The crowd had grown larger, townsfolk emerging from homes and businesses to witness the confrontation. Quentin moved closer to Faith, ready to shield her if violence erupted. Suddenly, a voice called out from the crowd. "It's true." All heads turned to see Martha Wilcox step forward, her face pale but determined. "What they're saying is true. My husband has been stealing from the church for years. I've known it and said nothing. God forgive me." A murmur ran through the crowd as Martha continued, her voice growing stronger. "The roof fund that we've all contributed to, there is no roof. The money is gone, spent on fine furniture and clothes and trips to Denver." "Martha, be silent." Wilcox hissed, his face mottled with fury, but Martha stood her ground. "No, Jacob, I've been silent too long. These good people deserve to know the truth." Her words seemed to break a dam of silence. Other voices joined in, townsfolk stepping forward to share their own suspicions and observations. The mood of the crowd shifted perceptibly, anger now directed at the Reverend rather than Faith. Seeing the change, Sheriff Miller slowly lowered his hand from his gun. "Step aside, men," he ordered his deputies. "Let the marshals do their job." Reverend Wilcox's expression changed from rage to desperation as he realized his support was crumbling. "You can't believe these lies," he shouted at the crowd. "After everything I've done for this town," but his words fell on deaf ears as the marshals moved forward to take him into custody. As they led him away, the Reverend's gaze locked on Faith, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, witch," he spat. "You'll pay for this." Quentin stepped protectively in front of Faith, his hand brushing hers reassuringly. "It is over," he said firmly, "for good." In the days that followed, Redemption Creek underwent a transformation. With Judge Davis personally overseeing the case, Reverend Wilcox was quickly tried and convicted of his crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, with many townspeople coming forward to testify once their fear of reprisal was removed. Faith was officially cleared of all charges and offered her teaching position back, which she accepted after some consideration. The town council issued a formal apology for her treatment, and many of her former students' families came to express their personal regret for not having stood by her. Martha Wilcox, free from her husband's domineering presence, emerged as a surprisingly strong woman. She insisted on selling all the ill-gotten possessions and returning the money to the church fund, then volunteered to lead efforts to find a new, honest minister for the congregation. Through it all, Quentin stayed in Redemption Creek, helping Faith rebuild her life and reputation. They spent hours together, walking through town or sitting on the porch of the small house Faith rented, talking about everything and nothing. The connection between them grew stronger with each passing day, evolving from mutual respect into something deeper. One evening, about a month after Wilcox's arrest, Quentin found Faith at the schoolhouse preparing lessons for the following day. The setting sun streamed through the windows, bathing her in golden light as she worked. "You're working late," he commented, leaning against the doorframe. Faith looked up, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Just finishing up. The children are preparing for a recitation contest next week." Quentin crossed the room to stand beside her desk. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice unusually hesitant, "about my future." Faith set down her pen, giving him her full attention. "And what have you decided?" "That's the thing," he admitted with a small smile. "For the first time in years, I'm not sure I want to move on. I'm finding reasons to stay." The look in his eyes left no doubt as to what, or rather, who those reasons were. Faith stood slowly, her heart racing as she moved around the desk to stand before him. "I'd like it if you stayed," she said softly. "Very much." Quentin reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I was hoping you'd say that." When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar and new all at once. Faith's arms wound around his neck as she leaned into the kiss, years of loneliness melting away in the warmth of his embrace. As they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find a home again," he murmured. "But I think I have with you." Faith smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. "From a church basement to here," she said wonderingly. "Who would have thought?" Quentin chuckled, drawing her closer. "I knew from the moment I said you're coming out that I didn't want to let you go. I just didn't realize how completely you'd captured my heart." In the year that followed, Redemption Creek became a different place. The new minister, a young man with progressive ideas and a genuine commitment to his congregation, brought a sense of renewal to the community. The church roof was finally repaired, funded by honest donations and the restitution from Wilcox's seized assets. Faith continued teaching, her classroom now filled with children eager to learn without the shadow of fear that had hung over the town during Wilcox's reign. She introduced new subjects and teaching methods, expanding the curriculum to include literature and science beyond the basics typically taught in small town schools. Quentin, for his part, found his place in the community as well. His experience with horses and cattle made him valuable to the local ranchers, and eventually he purchased a small property on the edge of town, building a modest house with his own hands. It was on the porch of that house, as summer gave way to autumn, that Quentin finally asked Faith to marry him. They were sitting side by side in rocking chairs he had crafted, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small wooden box. Faith opened it to find a simple but elegant gold ring with a small diamond that caught the last rays of sunlight. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Faith Thornton," Quentin said, taking her hand in his. "When I found you in that church basement, I had no idea I was also finding my future. You've shown me what it means to have courage, to stand up for what's right no matter the cost. You've taught me that home isn't a place but a feeling, and I feel at home whenever I'm with you." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled onto Faith's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Quentin Campbell, I will marry you." Their wedding took place that December in the newly renovated church, with Harold Richardson standing as Quentin's best man and Martha Wilcox serving as Faith's matron of honor. The entire town turned out for the celebration, a testament to how fully both Quentin and Faith had been embraced by the community they had helped transform. As they exchanged vows, Faith couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a dark church basement to a future filled with light and promise. That night, as they sat before the fireplace in their home, now truly theirs together, Quentin pulled Faith close. "Did you ever imagine when you were locked in that basement that it would lead to this?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Faith smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Never, but I'm grateful for it in a strange way. Without that darkness, I might never have found you my key to freedom, my path to happiness." Quentin chuckled softly. From your coming out to will you marry me quite a journey, Mrs. Campbell. And it's only just beginning, Faith replied, turning to capture his lips with hers, sealing their promise of a lifetime together. 5 years later, Faith stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Quentin taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, how to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Eleanor, sat on a blanket nearby, playing with wooden blocks carved by her father's hands. The town of Redemption Creek had grown as well, with new businesses and families attracted by its reputation as a progressive, welcoming community. Faith's school had expanded to include a proper building with multiple classrooms, where she now served as headmistress, overseeing 3 other teachers. Quentin's small ranch had prospered too, allowing him to hire several hands to help with the daily work while he focused on breeding and training horses, a skill for which he had developed a renowned reputation throughout the territory. As the family gathered for dinner that evening, Faith looked around the table at the life they had built together, the home filled with love, the children who were their greatest joy, the community that had become their extended family. Do you ever think about it? She asked Quentin later as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, a habit they had maintained through the years. Think about what? He asked, though the glint in his eyes suggested he knew exactly what she meant. That day, the church basement. How differently things might have turned out if you hadn't ridden into town exactly when you did. Quentin reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I used to think it was chance that brought me to Redemption Creek that day. Now I'm not so sure. Some things are meant to be, Faith. We were meant to be. Faith leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. From the darkest moment of her life had come the greatest light, a love that had not only saved her, but had transformed an entire community. A love that continued to grow stronger with each passing year. You're coming out, she murmured, echoing his words from that pivotal day. Little did we know where that simple phrase would lead us. Quentin smiled, drawing her close as the stars began to appear in the twilight sky. To the best journey of my life, he said softly. And it's not over yet, not by a long shot. As they sat together, wrapped in each other's arms and in the life they had created, Faith knew it was true. Their story, which had begun in darkness and fear, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to courage, justice, and the transformative power of love. In the years that followed, Redemption Creek continued to thrive, with the Campbell family at its heart. Faith's school became known throughout the territory for its excellence, drawing students from neighboring towns. Quentin's horse breeding business expanded, with his trained horses sought after by ranchers and cavalry officers alike. Their children grew strong and kind under their guidance, Thomas inheriting his father's affinity for horses and the outdoors, while Eleanor showed signs of her mother's intelligence and love of books. Later, they were joined by a 3rd child, Sarah, whose arrival completed their family circle. The church that had once been Faith's prison became the center of community life, hosting not only religious services, but also town meetings, concerts, and the school performances that Faith organized. The basement, now renovated into a community hall, bore no trace of its former darkness, a physical manifestation of how completely the town had transformed. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Quentin surprised Faith with a trip back to Denver, where they visited her father's grave and then spent a week enjoying the amenities of the growing city. It was during this trip, away from the daily responsibilities of their busy lives, that they had a chance to reflect on their journey. Would you change anything? Quentin asked as they walked arm in arm through a city park. If you could go back and rewrite our story. Faith considered the question seriously. Not a single word, she finally answered. Every moment, even the darkest ones, led us here. They made us who we are, together and individually. Quentin smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling lines earned through years of laughter and outdoor work. That's what I love about you, Faith Campbell. You see the purpose in everything, the light in the darkness. I learned that from you, she replied softly. You were my light when I had none. When they returned to Redemption Creek, they found the town had arranged a surprise anniversary celebration in the very church where their story had begun. As they danced together under the watchful eyes of friends and family, Faith whispered in Quentin's ear, Do you remember what you told me that day in the schoolhouse when you decided to stay? That I'd found my home with you, he replied without hesitation. Faith smiled, her eyes shining with the same love that had captured his heart all those years ago. And I with you, always and forever. As they continued their dance, surrounded by the community they had helped build and the family they had created, both knew that their story, which had begun with a locked door and a key to freedom, had become something far greater than either could have imagined. It had become a legacy of love, courage, and redemption that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the extraordinary journey that began with 7 simple words: "You're coming out."